Hello, thank you for joining us at the Lacuna Writers Room. You have heard an epic original composition by Ryan Franks and the haunting vocals of Nina Story, and that is how you know you have reached the Lacuna Writers Room. I am Christopher Gray. I am an author, a game designer. I enjoy long walks on the beach and paddleboarding, and with me is Danny Delisle. Danny, who are you?
I'm Danny. I'm an actress, a writer, a gamer. I do not like long walks on the beach because sand gets everywhere. I would much prefer something else. A nice restaurant, a bookstore, any of that sort of stuff.
Okay, Anakin.
I don't. Sand gets everywhere. It's true. He's not wrong. Okay, he's not
when
wrong.
you live in Southern California long enough, you don't think about sand anymore. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're wearing. So you go with gym shorts and flip flops.
You're good.
Sand, yeah. You just wash your feet off. You're cool. I mean, you don't have to like. It's just when the tourists come, you can tell the tourists are there because they have socks and shoes, and sometimes jeans, and then they bring their entire life with them, and blankets and pillows and tents and all of this stuff. And then, yeah, if you bring your apartment down, sand will get everywhere. But if you come down with, your flip flops, there's nowhere for the sand to go.
I'll keep that in mind. I mean, I live in Phoenix, so it's not like I'm one to talk about like not living in sand over here. So I literally live in a desert.
If you've been following along, we had a bit of a break because I was at a convention last week, and we're back. And it was a good time to pause because I think we've reached a point on our world building where we're sort of ready now to start talking about story building. We're obviously going to have to world build as we story build. It's going to be crossover, but we've kind of got. Wouldn't you say that we kind of got at least the basics in place?
Right. We have this stuff where we can now say, okay, let's do some stories. Because at this point, we'd have to fill out the gaps and decide, like, well, what do we have to decide? What don't we have to decide? And stuff. So I definitely think we have a good framework. We have our, design document. We have, what it is, what it isn't. We have a timeline, a basic timeline. So we have these things that we can really get started to get some stories in there. And, this is an IP that you can do anything with: comics, stories, videos. I mean, whatever you want to do really is what we were thinking, I mean, we were talking about a wide variety, any media, just that needs to take place in a world you could do. So, but we're going to start with some stories so that we're establishing the world a little bit and showing people kind of what we're on about in a practical sense by saying, oh, here's a story of like what we mean. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the bases are in place. I am going to create a setting reference document, which will be published in the Creative Commons licensing. And what this document's going to do, it'll be sort of our guidelines for writing in this setting, the established truths, whatever is canon will go in this document, and that way, as well as some of the language structure and things like that. So that way, if you want to write in Lacuna and you want to publish it as a Lacuna world story or media or whatever it is you're doing, you can use this setting reference document, and as long as you're following that, it can be a legit Lacuna product. Now, that's going to be separate than what we are considering canon to Lacuna, and that canon, whatever's canon, will be in that system document. So that document's going to be updated probably frequently. So if you want to come up with something that would be canon, then you would work with us directly, and we would have a channel for you to do that. But at least in terms of copy left, we're trying to open this up to the larger creative community, and I know this is kind of there's a trade wind here that we have to be conscious of. I understand that creatives are not at a shortage of ideas, right? Like, it's not that you can't come up with your own setting on your own. Of course you can, and you probably don't need us to give you a setting in order to write or create media. But the idea here is that we're kind of creating a setting together
Mhm.
as a group of creatives, and so there will be then, if you use the setting, presumably you would have a larger platform in which to create your own stories. And obviously, right now we're building that platform, but the vision is that enough people are working in this environment that it becomes a known quantity, so that when you're writing with it, it's almost like shorthand. Like, oh, I'm writing. It would be the same as I'm writing in the Conan world, right?
Mhm.
And so then you're just like, oh, okay, cool, I understand what that is, and you shorthand. So it kind of gives you a platform to plug into, a channel to plug into, an audience to plug into, and it'll kind of help with the lift of having to get your work out there.
Yep.
That's all. I don't think Danny. I don't think you're in any. This is the best setting ever made. We're just trying to create a channel for y'all. That's it.
It's cool though. And here's the thing, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, I don't need my own world, but if the world inspires you somehow, then go for it. That's a thing too. Like, you have your own stuff, but if you look at this and are like, hey, this inspires me, to, or we all as creatives have those ideas that are like in the dark corners of our computer that we can never do anything with. And you might have something that fits and be like, oh, I never knew what to do with this thing, but now I can do some tweaks on it and it can fit in Lacuna. And here we go.
So if you want to see what we did to the world to build it, you could check out episodes 1 through 4. That was all world building stuff, and then look for this setting reference document that'll be available on the website. And we're also trying to begin community building in Discord. I mean, there's really nobody there now, but we would like to start using Discord as a community center. Before we started the stream, Danny and I were talking about things like creating role play forums and play by post kinds of things in there, and try to come up with ways to use the community to create stories that way. And we're going to talk about other products that we can start bringing to market that are just beyond only just stories. So and now that we have kind of the initial setting, we can start doing that.
Yeah. So we were going to start talking about doing some story workshopping so that everyone can see how that works. And I had a couple ideas. We were going to start with me, I think.
Yeah.
And I had two ideas. And so I have them because I wanted to come to this and give a real good experience of fleshing this story out. And since the world is so new, I did have some notes, but nothing too extensive about what I wanted to do with it because I didn't know which idea might be the best. So one was I had an idea for the kind of mischief gods of Lacuna who end up becoming like Anansi or Hermes or Loki. Any of those kind of trickster gods that are out there. And my idea was that in Lacuna, in Atlantis, which we actually named in our last episode, so which is cool. You can go check out the language and everything. That back then, they're actually like a set of twins. And so whenever you hear these stories, it might be one or the other. Their names have changed and their forms change and all of that stuff. And my story was about how they became immortal, how they went through the trials. That was going to be the trials talking about, because they are the children of the gods, the transdimensional beings that we have decided that's kind of how they came here and settled and whatnot, and they are the children. And so because of that, they have to go through these trials. So I had the idea of a story of them going through these trials and what happens and how they kind of get in the world and how that happens. So that was one. The other idea was about it was a take on the story of Eros and Psyche and just to see, kind of make it more like what would happen if, because in the Storyverse and Psyche, they do end up together. But what if not? What if that wasn't actually what happened? And, or there was a time period when they didn't think it would happen. And Eros, or whatever form he happens to take in Lacuna, it kind of goes on a bit of a rampage and starts forcing all of these people to kind of have feelings for people who are like all wrong for them or will cause issues and a bunch of chaos. And it just goes to shit until someone has to do something about it, or something else happens. So those were the two ideas I had initially. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds great. One thing that we're trying to get to the bottom of is, I believe, maybe not in every case, but in many cases, since we're dealing with immortals, we can conflate a lot of the different mythologies into one person. So, I think it would be a mistake to conflate everybody that fits trickster god, for example, as that. But there might be like enough that align, not just in how they behave or how they're described, but geographically. Like, I wouldn't conflate Coyote and Loki, for example.
Right.
But there's probably a lot of Loki in other Germanic. Well, I don't know. Maybe Loki stands alone. Is it possible to conflate Loki and Hermes, for example?
Right.
I don't know. They might be different enough that wouldn't make sense. But my point is, if there is an immortal, the challenge is to figure out who else they might be in mythology, just so that we're consistent with that across the board, so that if somebody else wants to plug in, say over here, that it makes sense that this is the same person. Right. And here's the lore for that person. The other thing is the other people around, so who else is involved in the story? Who's the dramatis personae in the story? Because they also are going to have conflations. And, for example, I was thinking about in mine exploring the idea of Zeus. I'm a little hesitant, even though I have the story kind of charted, because it's almost too big of a personality. That might like quarter off too many other people from contributing to this, because it would involve so many of the mythology, and on the other hand, maybe it's good to do that so you can set a baseline for the Olympians at least. I don't know. So that's where my head is when we're thinking about these stories, is how much, on the one hand, we can go very small so that it doesn't impact anything else and it sort of exists in a vacuum, or on the other, we're creating precedent and common law for the setting by choosing these characters. So, and we're so early in the process. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with setting precedent in a big way for certain big characters.
Right.
So Eros is an example of somebody that's a big character. If you were to do Hermes, that would be another example of somebody who's a big character. The origin story of Hermes is really interesting to me, right? So that would be precedent setting. And so the first question is, are you okay with whatever story you choose to create a big precedent in Lacuna that this is, at least over here, you're going to chisel in stone something that's a pretty big deal?
Right. Yeah, I think those are ones that I'm familiar with, and I'm just used to it through freelancing. Where it's like, you're going to write this and this is what it's going to be when you're done. Like, oh, okay, I have to decide all that. All right. I'm kind of used to that from a freelancer perspective. Like, whatever I say, people are going to follow when they read the book, or ignore it or whatever. So I'm okay with that. I guess my question is, which do you think you would want to go with first, I suppose?
I think the trickster one, because it's foundational. It's foundational. The arrows one could happen anytime, anywhen. Right.
It even have to be like when, before the catastrophe or whatever.
Right. And I think it's good to create foundational stuff now, because, when you think about logistically in the setting reference document, there's it would answer a lot of questions about certain. So if somebody wanted to have Hermes in their story, then there's already a precedent on who that is and where they came from. And I like the idea of doing origin stories at this juncture. That's like, well, because my thinking is the origin story of Zeus. And that's, I think doing these origin stories is important, because then what happens later is in the wind, as long as we all understand where they came from.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, trickster god. My idea was,
and also, may I ask, I never considered Hermes a trickster god. Can you educate me on that? I always thought of him as like the wise messenger god. Yeah, and this would maybe where I'm completely out of touch.
Oh my gosh! I have so many stories. I have so many stories. Okay, so this is one of my favorite stories. Okay, so when Hermes was born, Hermes was the son of Zeus and Maya. I believe his mother's name was Maya, something like that. She was a goddess, but like a smaller goddess or a nymph or something like that. But Zeus being Zeus had gone down, and and now we have Hermes. And Hermes, right out of the gate, was precocious. I have in my book of Greek myth, it says when he woke up, he got up as a baby, keep in mind, got up as a baby while his mom was asleep and wandered around to see what he could find. And he found these cows that were Apollo's cows. And so he wanted these cows, and he wanted to establish himself as a god. So he sacrificed a couple of these cows to the 12 great gods, including himself as the 12th. So already he's a baby. He did this, and he wanted to take the rest of the cows for him and his mother. So what he did was he tied weeds, like footprint shaped weeds around the cows' feet, and then put like brushes on their tails and led them backwards out of the pasture. Okay. Where, back so that when Apollo came by, he saw that somebody had led something into the pasture, but nothing out. And there were no cows. But he was immediately suspicious of his new younger brother. He just had a vibe, right? So he went over there and he started confronting him. And in the meantime, Hermes had taken some of the sacrifice from the cows and made from the guts of the cow a lyre and stuff like that, an instrument. And Apollo found him and was like, "Hey, you took my cows." And Hermes like had the thing, and he's like, "Oh, I couldn't have possibly have done that." And Apollo's like, "Where'd you get those strings, those cow gut strings to make this lyre?" and Hermes was like, "I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you, if you want it, I love you, big brother." And Apollo wasn't having any of it. He was like, "You little brat," and chased him all the way up to Olympus. So imagine you're Zeus sitting on your throne, and this little baby, your newborn son with a lyre, is being chased by your much older son into court. And Apollo demands that Zeus do something. And Apollo is like, "You got to do something. He took my cows," and all of this stuff. And Zeus is amused. He's trying not to laugh. And he's like, "Did you do that?" And Hermes says, basically, he's like, "But father, I'm just a baby. I don't know what a cow is." Apollo's like, "You're not going to believe him, are you? Right? Really? You're not going to believe him, are you?" And Zeus is like, "Well, we'll let everybody decide." And so people wrote, like the gods wrote their names on a rock, and they were supposed to throw at the feet of the person who they believed, And Hermes got buried in them because so many people threw stones at his feet. And so that's why they make these little things at crossroads for Hermes in ancient Greece, because yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I had no idea.
I
I had no idea.
Another story that I really like is the story of the peacock and how the peacock got their eyes. So Hera, being a jealous goddess, because, you know, she was like, there goes Zeus off again, or whatever. And this time he was down there, and with Io, who was a princess. Io was her name. Her name was a princess. He's down there. He had this cloud covering them so they could do whatever they wanted. And Hera looked down and she's like, there's not supposed to be a cloud down there. There's not. So she rushes down there, and Zeus had like no time. And he's like, oh crap. So he turns her into this cow. Right? So when Hera busts through the clouds, there's Zeus with a cow. And he's like, oh, honey, I got you this cow. Look how beautiful she is. And Hera knew what was going on, but she played along, and she's like, oh, she's so beautiful. I'm going to put her in my garden and have my manservant Argus with the 1,000 eyes look after her. And Zeus is like, oh, shit. He's like, crap. So she takes it, puts it in her garden with her favorite servant, who's this Titan with 1,000 eyes all over his body. And he never closed any more than half at the same time. So Zeus is like, what do I do? I got to get her out of there, right? So he calls Hermes. And he's like, son, you got to go. And you got to get her out of there. And Hermes is like, really, Dad? Really? Whatever. So he goes down there, and he disguises himself as a beggar to Argus. And he starts telling this boring ass story. Like, so boring. No beginning, no middle, no end. And half the eyes start to fall asleep. And he just keeps going until the other eyes fall asleep. And then Hermes used his wand, because he's a psychopomp as well. He's also takes people down to Hades. Like, just, you know, closed his eyes and sleep forever, killed him, took the cow away from Greece and whatnot. And so Hera came and was devastated seeing her servant was dead. So took the eyes and put it on the peacock.
That's amazing. So, all right. So, are you interested? I mean, what are you thinking in terms of this story? Did you want? Is this the origin story for Hermes? For Hermes is actually twins.
Yeah, or, you know, maybe twins, and kind of one might be Hermes, but the other might be more likened with, you know, another trickster god. You know, they're, you know, maybe it's just one. I hadn't decided. I kind of thought it would be cool for like a trickster god to have, like, well, there were originally a couple of them, but they keep getting conflated in different names. So you never know which one it actually was, you know, because, you know, they're kind of both there, but it could always be one too. That's what the writer's room is for.
Well, I mean, I like the idea.
What the trial was going to be. I
like the idea, but well, first of all, can and should we conflate Hermes with other gods from other mythologies? I and maybe it's because of the Western mysticism that I've been involved in, but I've always conflated Hermes with Thoth in Egyptian mythology. But the more that I hear about Hermes, maybe that's not the best place for him. Where does Hermes get this reputation of being magical, or, you know, in charge of knowledge and wisdom? Or is that just a Western mysticism?
Well, that was really more Athena. What Hermes is in charge of is basically anybody that lives by their wits. Politicians, orators, communicators of any kind. His thing is communication. Athena is the goddess of wisdom and kind of like insight and knowledge. Hermes is communication. He's a messenger. That's why FTD Florist has Mercury as their symbol.
And that might be why it's conflated with Thoth, because Thoth was in charge of writing, you know. But it doesn't look like it. I don't know that, based on what I'm hearing, it's probably not best to conflate those two.
Right. Like I said, Hermes is the messenger. So he was often giving messages to gods because he was so fast. and communication, and travelers, as well. And he was also the psychopomp. So he was basically kind of like, you know, bringing people down to Hades.
Yeah.
Was a common thing.
And he would have been, according to Lacuna mythology, or the way we have the setting, he would have been born of an Olympian, and the Olympian was born of an elder. So he's third generation.
Yeah. Yes.
And
that'd be correct.
so yeah, he'd obviously have to go through trials. I don't know that you should necessarily chuck the twin idea. I think there's something there. And just because it's not consistent with the mythology you're pulling from, it's not inconsistent of it either, is it?
No,
It's feasible.
mean, because right, because either one, if you look at a trickster god, you say, oh, well, that could be somebody different, or it could be one of the twins, but we don't know. I kind of like the idea of it also being kind of an up in the air, or whatever, of like who did it. Do you remember Cats, the musical?
Oh, Cats, yeah, huh?
Yeah. They had
Mr.
Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer.
Oh, right.
Were notorious, because he was also the god of thieves. Hermes. So, Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer. Was it Mungo Jerry or Rumpelteazer? You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know. You don't know who it was. And they often probably used it to their advantage to pull off some of the stuff that they were pulling off.
Right. So their third generation, they would have to go through the trials to become immortal. Yes. And that's what the story would be about, right?
Right.
And then so there is a need to understand Zeus.
Yeah.
And there's a need to would there be any other major players involved? Remember, this is origin story, so it sounds like Apollo was there early, according to the myth.
Yeah. So you had like Apollo, Zeus. I think those would be the big two if you were going to do something like that. And what I was thinking, like for these particular, it would have to be something involving like kind of mischievousness or stealing, or, wits, being silver tongued and cunning, that they would do this. Like, perhaps, because my initial thought is maybe they weren't, being allowed to go through the trials or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they were so precocious and they're so like, whatever, but they decide, no, we're going to do it. So they figure out a way to either sweet talk, steal, or, misprank their way into going through the trials.
All right. Well, let's first pinpoint when this is happening. So third generation. And I do have thoughts on Zeus, so we might have to come together on Zeus because of what I want to do. So we have some overlay right there.
Well, that's if he becomes more than like a mention.
Yeah,
you know what
right.
I mean? I mean, he might not actually like appear. He just might be talked about. Like, oh, Dad said this, that, or the other thing. Like whatever. We're not going to listen to him, or whatever it happens to be.
So, I believe that Zeus would be largely the one of the big forces in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So that would it would have to be after the Cataclysm, if Zeus is in the story, because this is basically the Titan War.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is, after the Cataclysm, the Diaspora that sweeps across Europe, Asia, and culminates in the Trojan War. So there is, we haven't discussed the Cataclysm at length, or how widespread it is. We know that at some point the continent needs to sink. That's going to be the end result of that. But there could be a period of time where it's just war torn, and this leads me to think that this is happening probably in the East and not in Atlantis necessarily, since it's third
Right.
generation. I'm just bouncing this out there. Maybe it can work, but since this is so, since it's the kids of the kids of the kids, right? I think that if it's happening on Atlantis, Atlantis is not the paradise it was. It's wild and war torn, or it's happening in Europe or or Mycenae or somewhere in the East.
Right. Well, that could be to
as
my
the diaspora is
benefit.
happening,
If all this stuff has happened, then their thinking might be like, well, everybody's distracted or dealing with this, that, or the other, so it'll be easier for us to snow everybody because people are distracted with what's going on, or recovery efforts, or whatever happens to be. Yeah.
So okay, that gives us a little context on where and when. When, but where, if it's going to be Atlantis, I guess in general, if it's a story that has to do with a lot of humans and with younger gods, then it probably is happening after Atlantis or during the war. If it's having to do with the gods amongst themselves, then it might be happening on Atlantis, I think, as a general rule of thumb. And this could be crossover, could be both, but it does happen. It should probably happen later in the timeline.
What I'm thinking is, what might be cool is if it's twins, I can also use it to bring in some stuff. What I'm thinking is maybe like the first scene is kind of the twins getting together somewhere, not Atlantis, but somewhere in the world. They're getting together to discuss, what's happening and what they want to do and their plan. Or they're kind of getting together to initialize it. So then I can kind of, in that first scene, like they've been apart for a little while, perhaps doing things to kind of foster what they're about to do. Like they planned this for a while, and now they're getting together to kind of enact their plan. And that's where our story starts.
Oh, it's a heist movie.
Yeah. Like that's what I'm thinking. Like it's they gotta, I love those. So I'm always looking for a way to kind of do that vibe. So, they kind of get together. They've been away for a little while from each other because they have this plan to get in there so that they can do the trials. So that leads the question of, and kind of the first scene is them getting back together to kind of initiate their plan.
So what format are you thinking on this story? Is it going to be like a short story, a series, a novel?
I'm thinking short story.
Okay. Now, is it going to be the start of a series of short stories about these characters, or is it just a one and done?
It could be. Like, it'll be... I assume that's going to have to come from where I am. Like, I'll do a short story, and if I feel like their light needs a part 2 or something, I can do that. Or if I can kind of wrap it up myself.
If it's a series, it would be a short one, in other words. So it'd be like a limited series.
Yeah, it'd be like a 3 short story series or something.
Yeah, okay. All right, cool. So... yeah, I mean, then it would just be a question of figuring out where it's happening, what the trials are, how they're gonna pull off their trial heist, and trick everybody into making them gods, basically. And so, there's the people who don't want them to be gods. Who are they?
Right. And I feel like, because Zeus always seemed to have, when I read the myths, always seemed to have a hot spot for Hermes.
Yeah.
Just because he amused him and he was kind of funny and, was always willing to like kiss butt if he needed to. Like, oh, father, you're so powerful, you know, like whatever. You know what I mean? Like he used that to his advantage. So I feel like in this case, we can kind of use that. Then maybe, you know, people might tell him, oh, I think they're going to do this, that, or the other. And Zeus might be like lackadaisical about it. Might just be like, you know, like he's not really concerned. He kind of hopes they pull it off. Maybe, you know, he's not really going to give him more than a slap on the wrist or something. Like when he finds out what happened, you know, even if Hera's pissed about it or Apollo's pissed about it or whatever. You know.
I mean, I think you can just take the story you told us at the top of this episode and make that the story, but with realistic eyes. So it's the twins stealing the trial from Apollo, making themselves immortal, and then going back to Zeus, who goes,
yeah.
All right. Does anybody disagree with this outcome? You know, and I think it could just be that. And maybe Apollo is planning the trial for somebody else or
one of his kids, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Like he was getting it together or whatever.
Yeah. And so, maybe in that case, it is happening if that's the case, this is happening on Atlantis. We should start
or at the very least, you have to go there for for what's happening.
Right. We should call it the right name. It's Adelinus.
What's that?
Adelinus, not Atlantis.
Yeah, I don't know. That's right. That's right. Yeah, so here's my thought, right? Here's what I'm thinking. The trials I really wanted to be, and we've talked about that they can be like anything, and there has to be some kind of like element that kind of gets it started that you have to do. But like once you do that, and it should be like something that's kind of, you know, something that can be used in writing in different ways. And you have to do this particular thing. But I also want them because it's only basically like the star of the trial that's going to be same, like what triggers it, I guess. But the trial is going to be different for everybody once that happens. Like when you start your trial, you do this thing, you start the trial, and then like you walk through a door or you find yourself somewhere else, and then your trial's begun. And it could be anywhere. It could be anything. You could be on another planet. You could be a different part of the world. You could be whatever. It doesn't matter. That leaves the writer the ability to do whatever they want with somebody's trial if they're writing the trial, right? So whatever it is, what I'm thinking is they're going to do that. But because Apollo is Apollo, and he's like the sun, and he kind of has the personality to match a little bit, that he wants to make a big deal that he's going to do this trial for his child, right? So he wants it to be on the island. He wants all the old school ceremony with it. You know what I mean? Like he wants it instead of just doing kind of whatever. It's kind of like, you know, oh, you're going to have a birthday party. You know, some people just have their little cake and they go ahead and have their little cake. And then you got quinceas, you know, quinceaneras, and you got the whole whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, I think that the first, the first generation descendants probably created a formal rites process in Adelinus, in the capital. Now you can do this anywhere, but they do it here to get special recognition. Like that means you are the elite. You know, you are favored,
right, legit.
Yeah. Like if you do it in Iberia, okay, I guess you're immortal, but you're not one of us, right?
Right.
So you have to do it our way. It is probably. I mean, I think we should just rip off the Egyptian journey to the afterlife, and maybe conflate it with the Olympian journey to the afterlife, because it is so prescriptive. This is like, you do this, you go here, and you do that, and then you take this boat, and the boat takes you here, and it's similar to the Olympian one, and it's just like, you know, and it's all very ceremonial, and I think borrowing and stealing from Egyptian mythology, since it's such an old practice, even better if we can find that the Babylonians or the Sumerians had a similar journey to the afterlife, because that's all these are. And it goes all the way through, like the Elysian mysteries up in the Middle Ages were from these older traditions, and it was all about the journey to the afterlife and then coming back. Hell, the
Right.
Orpheus story is that. I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
the Jesus story is that. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's all these stories in mythology about,
Inanna,
yeah,
Inanna, sorry.
Inanna. And you go and you go through the trials in the underworld and you come back. And then when with the Egyptian too, there's kind of a twofer, because it's Ra dying in sunset and then fighting the worm underground and then
Oh,
coming
you know
back.
what would be yeah, you know what would be baller, right? Like, oh yeah, you can do it like the traditional way with all the rights and stuff. It's not necessary because really all the requirements you need is this and this,
Yeah,
right? But like if you're gonna be really hardcore about it, or you're gonna be like, elite, then you do the whole ceremony, you walk through the marble frame and you do the whole descent and all that stuff, right? So what if that's what they're expecting? They bust in, they go through the door or whatever they're supposed to go through, and then it's different because it's not the person that they were sending through.
right.
So now they have to figure out, like, oh, now what do? We were all prepared to, you know, do these rights and do all this stuff, and now we can't. Now we're kind of lost, and so they kind of have to use their wits and their cunning and whatever to kind of get through what's presented to them, because they're not supposed to be there.
That's great. And they actually have to embody the other person who's they built it for them. That's hilarious. I'm going to go back on something I said earlier. I think that this civil war isn't between the elders and the youngers. That happens back here, probably,
Mm-hmm.
in the 3500s. I think this is what ends Atlantis. So I think I'm going back, and if we're going to the timeline, actually, it would be on Atlantis before the Cataclysm,
Okay.
but after the Titans. Because the civil war is between Zeus and others, not between Zeus and the Titans. So,
Right.
and this is where the Hebrew god comes into play, which is much later, and humans are more prevalent. So, just based on the timeline, as we're dialing this in, it does sound like it would be on Adala, not in like Iberia or Mycenae. So yeah, we can. This is just Olympian shenanigans, basically.
Right.
And I was gonna.
I think the only thing that I need the question on, because like I can look up like rights of the dead and and be like, oh, they prepared all this and everything for him to go through and face whatever. But it is individualized, so
Right.
when they get in there, it's different. I can work on all that and do
Yeah.
whatever I want there. But what I kind of need to establish is, despite all the ceremony, what is necessary for the ceremony to take place? Like, what do you have to do to start a trial? Like, what has to happen?
Yeah.
Right. And we kind of already talked about what you need to get through the trial. We've talked about a couple things. But I kind of need to know what's that thing, because then people can use that
I think
to start other trials if they want to. But that's
I
going
think
to be the
I think
point.
just borrow from mythology. I mean, because somebody's already done this. Somebody's figured this out. The Egyptians, the Mycenaeans, the Babylonians. I think we just take their process. The Elysian mysteries did this. And they all, what they all do is many of them do is that it's about weighing your soul in some way or another, or taking some sort of judgment and going to that place to take the judgment. And then after the judgment, well, going to the judgment is a journey of trials. And then you're judged. And then after that judge, you lose your body and you move on into wherever you're supposed to go. And so there's always this like going to trials, dying, and then returning from death. And that's when you're initiated anew. And and that the death and resurrection trope was common among the mystery schools. It's because the idea was you have to shed your physical body to see your true self, and now you can come back without all the burdens of the material, and you are,
So are we
illuminated.
So what it sounds like, and this could be used a variety of ways and personality, but it is a sensitive topic, is that, are we saying that to start the trials, the person has to kill themselves first?
I don't think, no, I think the
However
person
they
has to
can?
die. I think the person has to die, probably. But I think it's one of those, like, anybody can die, but can you come back?
Right. But in order for that to work, like I said, then they would have to, if they're doing a big ceremony and they're going to send somebody through trials, then that means ritual sacrifice. That means they're going to lay this person out who's going to go through it, so that they can go through their judgment and go through the trial. Like, they have to die first. So that's what we're talking about. Just to be clear.
To become immortal. Yeah. I mean, that's what vampires do. They kill you.
Right.
And you come back. That's what the mystery schools do. That's what happens when prophets ascend.
Okay. I mean, I'm okay with it. But I'm just saying that is a pretty, and it can be used anywhere. Like if you have a story set in 1920, and you have somebody that you want to go through the trials, they don't need to have a big ceremony where they drink this ritual poison to die and lay down on a slab. They just have to, like, jump in front of a bus or something,
right. Yeah.
And you can use that for how somebody chooses to do it. If they make a big ceremony of it, if they just throw themselves off a bridge, if they do that. But I am saying that is a pretty, it is a topic. So there are going to be people who are not going to want to deal with that.
Yeah, it is.
Which is fine. I'm okay with it personally. I'm just pointing it out as something I see. If that's going to be our thing, that has to happen. I see. Well,
in the philosophical world, I guess in the mystery schools too, what they talk about is deconstruction. Right? You deconstruct yourself. And maybe that doesn't need to be a physical deconstruction. I mean, it's you have to break down everything that you know about the world and reduce it to nothing, and then you can rebuild anew, right?
Right. Okay.
I think that maybe that can be done, but I'm guessing. I mean, this is antiquity, so
right.
Yeah, you could go through a very therapeutic session over the course of months on a mountaintop above the ocean and deconstruct your worldview till nothing, and then get reimagined as somebody anew and illuminate. Or you can throw yourself on the rocks and make it happen like that, right? So I think the end goal is the same, but I would not at all be surprised if that's how the ancient gods made people immortal. It is.
I mean, it was in. Did you ever see American Horror Story Coven?
Yeah, that's the same.
That was
thing.
One of the trials that they had to die,
go to hell,
and get their way out. Now, I'm saying it's totally legit. I mean, that's an ancient, sacrifice or death of the body or whatever. So we could say it's that, or, hey, if somebody wanted to, they could literally meditate and transcend.
Sure.
Hey, maybe they make themselves a Quabalic puzzle.
Yeah.
Find a Quabalic puzzle that they then solve, that then sends them along this trial that they kind of, as they're solving this, deconstructs themselves.
Yeah. And to answer your question, I think the thing that has to happen is that you have to completely remove your entire perception of the world, so that it can be replaced with a new one. And that can be done.
That means.
That can be done in many ways. The easy way is to, use
I think we
daggers.
Should write that down. So in order to start your trial, whatever that is,
you have to eliminate your worldview.
You have to eliminate your worldview.
Yeah.
And that could mean death. that could mean meditation.
A really
That
great
could
mushroom.
mean shroom, you know. That's Dionysus. That's what
right.
happened with Dionysus. He just got so drunk and he got so high that Dionysus
He
just
found
like
divinity.
transcended. He just became immortal by accident, like after an orgy. Like that's what
Right.
happened.
Oops.
Now I gotta write that story about how Dionysus became immortal by accident.
After a really great party.
After a really great party, just so many drinks, so much sex, so much alcohol. It was just like, I transcended reality. And everyone's like, yo, Dionysus partied so hard. He became immortal. What is up with that?
That's hilarious.
There you go. There you go. I like it. So I think that's our deconstruct your sense of self, sense of reality. We should write that down somewhere.
Yeah, I took a note.
But it could be a death. It could be a puzzle. It could be, chemicals. It could be. But in this case, I think what I want to go for, since we're kind of playing off that story, is that, Apollo set this whole thing up, with Zeus there presiding over it or whatever. And his child is going to take this poison and lay down on this gold slab or whatever, and then rise up, and it's this whole whatever, they get ritually bathed, they whatever, and maybe the twins come in and pretend to be the bathing attendants for the ritual.
Yeah.
And then they find the child in a closet somewhere, gagged at some point. I don't know.
That's great. Let's look at, okay, now that we have a bit of a picture, I'm going to look at log lines. So as you know, I like to use Save the Cat. And I want to get in the practice of doing this because for those of you listening, Save the Cat is a book that a guy wrote about screenplay writing, and it's become kind of an industry known approach. The criticism of it is very valid in that it's highly formulaic and very restrictive. And so it's not, I argue that restriction can help with creativity, but it does not allow you to do much outside of the norm, right? But it's a really great template for story building. And I think going through the template and then choosing to break it is cool and fine. But I do think we should go through the template and just sort of make sure the elements are there, because the canon fiction especially, it needs to be highly invested in the characters, because what's going to make a Lacuna great are the characters, not the setting. So this kind of forces us to think about story building in a constructive way. I'm not saying this is gospel, but it's a really great place to start. There are other models which are perfectly good too, but I happen to like this one. And Danny, if there's a model that you would like to use instead, obviously that sounds fine.
I mean that's fine. I'm familiar with Save the Cat. I mean, like you said, people should think of it as a frame, a guide, the push pins. Don't be beholden to it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But just if you feel like something's missing, go back and see. I mean, any good writer or anything that you do, whether you're a cook, a painter, whatever, is know the rules and then break them in a way because you know the rules, so that you know why you're breaking it. Usually if you're using Save the Cat, you might do this here, but I'm not doing that because, this, that, and the other thing. You know, it's a good way for people to kind of have a baseline, a guide, a frame, and then kind of move from there and start with. And then at a certain point, I always find that if I start with, a couple points or something that I have, eventually it takes over. Eventually I don't need to look at that framework anymore. It just usually helps me get started.
Right.
it just usually helps me get off the starting block. And then once I'm off the starting block, the story just goes,
Right. And it is meant for screenplays. So the idea is that you're hitting a bunch of beats and that, everything that happens is there because it's driving the story or the character forward. And so you define these beats ahead of time. You kind of fill in the blanks. That doesn't, it's not the best format for, say, novel writing, especially if your novels are character driven, because you're more interested in the interactions with the characters and how they grow and arc over the time than you are in what actually happens in the story, right? So it does give you a framework, and I found that it works across medium. What you're looking, one of the things it does really well is the log line, and I do want to use log line methodology in Lacuna as a way to help evaluate our stories. So as we're going to have lots of ideas. You already came with one already that you want to do. You had 3 ideas today that I counted. And so what doing log lines will do is help us communicate these ideas in a way that a reader would take it, so that it's not in the abstract, that you can actually see what the story is going to be. And it's a great way to pitch ideas. So I want to start using log lines as sort of a modus operandi. And like, for example, if you're listening to this and you want to pitch a story, think in terms of movie log lines, because that'll help us understand the vision you're going with.
In space, no one hears you scream.
Exactly. One
of my favorites.
It's like, it's Heather's, but in a generation spaceship. That's a good log line, right?
My log line that I used to describe the novel that is in perpetuity being worked on forever and probably will never finish.
The best kind.
I like to say that it is Nightmare on Elm Street meets Legally Blonde, and that immediately makes people go like, "What?"
They're very powerful, and Save the Cat has a really great methodology to log lines, and this is only just a snapshot of it, but it's enough. The basic formula to a log line is that there's a hero that has it's supposed to be an objective, not an adjective. Oh no, it does mean adjective. What type of hero? You're qualifying the hero. A sad hero, a witless hero. There's a goal that has to be compelling and ironic. A sad hero wants ice cream, but is in the middle of the desert. And a problem that it's a primal problem they have to get past, and they're starving to death. I don't know. I just made that up. But that's the formula for a log line. And then somebody went through to Save the Cat formula and then made ones for all the different Save the Cat genres. So Save the Cat says that there are only a handful of actual genres. Golden Fleece is like the quest. Institutionalized is, you're stuck in a prison. Monster in the House, self-explanatory. And interestingly, they attest that Monster in the House is probably the most effective story structure you can do.
Yeah.
Because it's inherently primal.
Yeah, those are fun.
Yeah, Out of the Bottle.
I mean, that's your Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah. Alien.
Yeah.
Out of the Bottle. A lot of superhero movies the fun ones are out of the bottle. Like I have a superpower, like Spider-Man's out of the bottle. Like I got this weird this power, but I don't know what to do with. It's kind of a curse. Dude with a Problem. These are great. Rites of Passage. Anyway, the list goes on. There's all of these. So, just hearing it, there, on the surface, it might look like Rites of Passage just because of the content, but I don't know that it is. It might be a buddy love story, where an adequate hero must rise above the difficult situation and be with an unlikely partner, and the only one capable of bringing them peace. Right? It might be that. Mm-hmm. Or it might be
my guess, looking at these, is the closest would be probably Out of the Bottle.
Yeah, a covetous hero must. I can't get to it. Open. A covetous hero must learn to undo a spell he wished for before it turns into a curse he
Right.
can't undo.
So in this case, it's like these heroes, have wanted this thing and went to do this thing, and now they got to deal with it. Like the majority of the story is them going through this trial of, hey, this is what you wanted. And they're like, oh, you know what I mean? Like it's not what they thought, because they thought, I didn't know what they thought. But once they get there, they're like, oh, this is actually tough. This is actually, this actually sucks. This is actually a trial. And now we got to deal with it and try to come through and survive it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this genre needs a wish. We want to be immortal. It needs a spell, which is the rites.
The trial.
Yeah. And it needs a lesson. What do they take away?
The lesson will be because, if our thing is they have to deconstruct who they are, the other thing that we kind of talked about is there still has to be something to kind of get them through, right? And I think the lesson here is going to end up being, because even though Hermes was a trickster, even though Hermes went all over the place and everything like that, he still had an important purpose, which was communication. So they learned that like all their mischievousness and all of that stuff is all well and good, but they also need to realize the actual purpose that sort of thing serves in the bigger scheme of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that there is a certain responsibility that comes with having this power. You know what I mean? So I think their journey is one from mischievous kind of irresponsibility to through the trials, understanding that with great power comes there's great responsibility.
Right.
Not that they're completely, not their usual happy-go-lucky, mischievous selves, but the fact that they also have a responsibility that, that stealing, because like I said, he was the god of thieves, gods of orators, politicians, travelers. He was also the psychopath in terms of Hermes. So that's a lot of different, but they all have the same thing of people who either live by communication or their wits.
Mm-hmm.
And moving from one place to another. So basically witty wanderers, I guess. But in that sense that those people have a purpose in life, and that if they're going to do this, then they need to make sure they understand what purpose that serves, I
wanted to find the beat board. Here it is. So we're still talking Hollywood here, but a beat board is when you take 3x5 cards and pin them up to a cork board, and you move those cards around, and each one represents a moment in time in the movie. And you kind of arrange the cards and how and what happens here, and then you can move the cards around, and you can add more cards to the beat board, and it's how you visualize the story structure. And there's a lot of great software that does that. Final Draft, I think, is probably the best on the market right now. It's certainly the market leader on script writing, and it has a built-in beat board that corresponds with the script. Mm-hmm. Again, it's highly structured. When you're dealing with 90 minutes or whatever, every minute has to count, right? So it's not as important with fiction, but it's a really great way to make sure you're hitting all the beats, is by just looking through the beat board and wondering, how is the story going to flow? Mm-hmm. And this is, I think that there are different types of writers. There are writers that will just write the story and then edit the story structure after it's written, mm-hmm. because they have, they got to write down what they see and the order that they see it. And then they use editing to kind of, see where the gaps are on, say, story beats. If you're using like a 3-act structure or something, or a hero's journey or whatever framework mm-hmm. you're thinking, you might not even be using a framework. I mean, there are plenty of good authors that have no frameworks, and they just, and sometimes their stories are much more stream of consciousness, and every bit as valid and awesome as stories that are highly structured. The reason I want to think about beat structure in the case of our stories, because again, we're trying to create canon. So the stories have got to be inherently about the stories have got. Well, I'm not sure how to articulate this. So I think that the stories have got to feel structured, like they fit together. If we go, especially in these early stages, if we go with different methodologies on creating the stories, they might not feel congruent or connected. So there's part of me saying we should at least put a structure in place to kind of make them feel like they're part of the same
world,
right? And I that doesn't mean that we can't deviate from that. But I think in general, we should probably fall into the same structure.
Right.
And when you think about comic books like the Marvel Universe, there are some comic lines that are extremely formulaic and they're the same thing over and over and over again. Like, the Fantastic Four,
right,
always the same thing over and over again. But then there's comic lines that are just completely on their own track, like Deadpool. Like you don't know what's going to happen in a Deadpool comic, right? And so, but by and large, most of the comics are kind of fit that Fantastic Four modality.
Right. Well, it's really like a style guide. Almost, is kind of what we're talking about.
Right. So I don't think this is about invalidating other frameworks. It's just like I would like to choose a framework.
Right.
Just at least to keep.
Well, and I think one that's a little more structured, it works for, wanting to bring a bunch of people in it.
Yeah.
Because you got to keep them kind of on the same page, at least in the same book,
Right. Right. And it's just guardrails, but it doesn't mean that you can't deviate. It's just as long as we're all kind of thinking with the same language. This is about fluency, speaking in the same language so that we understand each other and we understand the story we're trying to tell. And then we can also understand when you don't want to use that framework because it's you're trying to do something different that's outside the framework. That's cool.
Right.
But especially in the early stages, I would like to do this and we'll see how it goes. And we might just see that it's too structured and, fuck it. But it's a starting place. This beat board is organized in categorical beats, which again is very cinematic, but this follows a hybrid of the hero's journey. The MCU formula is a bunch of engineering in here that gives you a framework for story blocks. So there's the opening image. This is Save the Cat stuff where you have an opening image that dictates the theme and the vibes of the story. The theme stated, so early on in the story, the point of it needs to be articulated by somebody or something so that when the story ends, you can refer back to that and that theme is carried through. So if the lesson here is that the twins, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, obviously Spider-Man does the theme stated every other scene ad nauseum to the point where it's become hilarious. But, it's clear that the Spider-Man movie is about with great power comes great responsibility. And then there's exposition, which builds up all of the elements of the story until there's a catalyst. And in Hero's Journey, the catalyst is usually the inciting moment, I think is what it's usually called. And it's where something is going to change your day to day and you have to make a decision as the protagonist of the story. There's a debate about whether or not you're going to prepare for that or you're going to do it at all. And that's usually like in the 80s movie, this was usually a montage of you getting ready to do the thing you're going to do. You're going, shopping and, all of the things you have to do to prepare for the big date or whatever it is.
Using the Aquanet,
right?
Like whatever they're doing in the 80s.
But the debate is always kind of preparing to go on your journey, right?
Right.
And what can I even do it? How will I succeed? Did I bring enough supplies or? And then break into two is a shorthand for breaking into the second act of the story.
Right.
And in the context of story building, whatever's happening in the second act is a completely different world than the protagonist was living in the first act.
This is easy. So let's go back and talk about it. Ooh,
okay.
I'm dropping my fidget toy. Let's go back and talk about it in relation to my story because it seems to fall pretty easily into that.
Yeah, I think it does.
Right. So the opening image is going to be the twins meeting and we'll see their mischievous sides. That's going to be the opening image, quickly establish the characters in the opening image. They're meeting at a market somewhere and one of them just pickpocketed some market stall or something, something like that. So we're going to immediately establish the twins as mischievous the theme stated, you know, they might have a little convo about like, you know, dad says you shouldn't be so irresponsible with doing this stuff around mortals, you know, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera.
Right.
Exposition. Oh, we have this plan. Da 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 da. Why? Because the catalyst is Apollo's getting his kid through. So
Right.
that motivates us because we're going to conscript that debate. Do we really have everything? Do we really want to do this? We're totally
Well,
going to do this
in a
thing.
heist movie, the debate is like articulating the plan, and then everybody
Right.
preparing for the things that are in the plan. Right.
Right.
It's the
And
going
the
to the
break-
store to getting the, you know, the bombs from the store, or going to, you know, all that, the surveillance.
Yeah. And then the break into two is obviously once they pull it off, now they're in a completely different, now they're in the trials. Now they're, you know, now they're there. they pulled it off. Now what? They caught
now
the
they're in the
car
trial.
that they were chasing. Now what do they do with the bumper?
Right.
You know?
Right.
I remember one time because I have dogs, and we found a bumper on the side of the road on a walk. Our dog was so confused. Like, what is this thing? All right. But yeah, so that's the easy break into two where they meet up, they discuss, we establish their character, establish the heist or the stealing, the catalyst that Apollo's kid is going through this ceremony. That's all like the first scene, right? And then the second is breaking into two will be how they get into the ceremony, and now they're on the other side. They successfully did what they wanted to do. Now here they are.
Oh shit.
Oh shit.
Well, I want to bring up B story because B story is next. B story, I believe, is the most important component of storytelling, and it's often the one that's most overlooked. I know as a writer, I've been writing ever since I was a little kid, and I didn't really get the B story thing until I played Baldur's Gate 3. It's hilarious, but I didn't get it until 2 years ago. I knew what B story was, but I didn't realize how important B story was until I played this stupid video game. It's not a stupid video game, but
when used appropriately, it really bolsters everything else.
If you look at the MCU as a perfect example of an institution that uses B story, great. And I would argue that the reason that the later Marvel or the MCU movies, especially the early ones, are way better than DC movies is because of this. In the Marvel movies, it is way more important that the characters deal with their B story first. And often they can't even get to the A plot until their B story is resolved. And so the focus of the movie is on their personal problems and shenanigans, not on the A plot. Like it's about, like, when you think about the Avengers, the B story was the Avengers hated each other. And they all had personal beefs with one another, and it culminates in one of the most beautiful scenes, I think, in recent memory and of any movie that I've seen, is that really tense scene where they're all arguing with each other, and Hulk is about to Hulk out over it, and they just cannot get their shit together. They have these personal beefs and ego and all this stuff getting in the way. That's the B story. The A plot is that, you know, aliens are invading because Loki, right? But nobody's even you can't even get to that until you fix this problem, right?
Right.
And you watch the really good Marvel movies, and they do that. They harp on the B story as the most important part. Get past that B story, then you character can go after the A plot.
You know, want to know what my favorite MCU B story is? I'll be real.
Is
Iron Man and Spider-Man.
Oh,
that's my favorite.
It drives so much. It drives so much.
Adorable. I love it. I love it. Like, and that's a good example of what you're talking about too, in terms of MCU. That's not the whole Avenger Group B story, but that is specifically for Spider-Man and Iron Man having to deal with how they feel about it. Well, kind of because Iron Man had all these issues with his dad, and Spider-Man didn't really have anybody to mentor, and how they both get into these roles that they're not used to and they desperately want to have with each other, but their personalities and their lives and everything have just been so different that they kind of resist it until I think the moment is when Spider-Man gets snapped, and
Yeah.
then that was because the first thing he says to Captain America when they come back is, "I lost the boy." Like that
Yeah.
was it.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
that's what caused him to spiral. It wasn't the
yeah,
fact that snap happened. It was that in particular. And what brought him back was coming to terms with his B story. That was, you know what, this wasn't my fault. And if there's a way I can try to maybe make it right, I should. And that's how he joined the team again. It
right.
was because of Spider-Man, because of
Tony had to learn that it was okay to care
yeah.
because he
Yeah,
spent
there you
so
go.
much of his
Yeah,
life not caring,
right.
right? He just doing what he wanted. He was rich, smart, doing these weapons, making these weapons, sleeping with whoever, et cetera, and not really caring about the consequences because he had been hurt and didn't want to care. And then Peter Parker comes along, and this boy who desperately needs somebody to care about him. I
Yeah.
mean, he has his aunt, but
Yeah.
like that's not the same sort of thing. His aunt cares, but like not, especially when he becomes Spider-Man. He doesn't
Yeah.
have anyone to
Yeah.
talk to about that until his aunt finds out.
Right.
Right. But he desperately needs other people in his life to care about them. He just wants to be cared about. And Tony wants to care, but he can't. He just has walled himself off from that.
Right.
And so that whole father-son adopted relationship is stemmed of all of that. Somebody who wants to care but can't, somebody who needs to be cared for, and all of that. And once they resolve those, then Tony is able to make the sacrifice that he makes. And
you nailed it. You nailed it. That's why these movies are great, because of that. It's the B story.
Yeah.
DC doesn't do that. They don't focus on the B story. If there is one, usually it's just a plot. And I started this tangent when I was mentioning Baldur's Gate 3, and the reason it taught me so clearly was because it's almost a mechanic in that game. You've got to do the B stories before you can move on with the A plot. Like the A plot is urgent and it sucks, and I'm not going to say much about it because you have to play the game and there's spoilers, but like there's a time clock. You are going to die if you don't figure this out, but you really need to help these people out because of your B plot, and you really need the people that are your companions in the group. They care way more about their B plot than the A plot, and you have to get past that before you can even move ahead. And the best, and I heard somebody say this about B plots, the best B plots are completely tied into the A plot, and that's when it's really magical.
Well, yeah, it's so true. That's really good.
So that's why B story is here. That's important.
It's definitely going to be that the twins have some sort of thing between them. They've been apart for a while. They plan this thing, but they're not the same. And they don't always get along. And so my B plot is, I haven't exactly fleshed it, but it's definitely going to be there's some kind of tension between them, that they're not going to get through everything until they figure that out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's maybe what the trials are about.
Yeah.
And then fun and games is the save the cat shorthand for the stuff you went to see. You went to go to the movie to see this stuff. This was what was advertised. If you
the trailer.
If it's Avengers, you went there to see the Avengers fighting the big bad. That's why you showed up, right? That's what fun and games is all of the scenes of the Avengers fighting the big bad. This is what the pitch promised.
Look, I went to Pacific Rim for giant machines killing kaiju.
There was a bunch of fun and games there.
That was it. There was a B plot and there was a plot. But, I mean, that's not why I went. That's not what they showed in the trailer. So
right. So on the fun and games is here. This pitch is promising tricksters coming of age. So this is the part of the story where they get to do that, and you get to show that.
Yeah.
And then the midpoint is
to make. Yeah.
The midpoint is when things are starting to turn for the worst. Either it looks like things are going to turn for the best, and you're going to fix this, or you can see that it's turning for the worst. One of the two. And then bad guys close in until you get to the all is lost stage. And that is the dark night of the soul moment. And it's when you're, staring out over the bridge and just, I've got nothing left.
So, as they're going through this, tensions mount and tensions mount. And then all is lost when they have a huge argument about what they should do or what's happening. And everything comes into the forefront. And, all the built up tension, all the grudges, all the whatever resentment, is happening. That's what that point is.
And probably one abandons the other, or there's just like, no, we're just stuck. We're dead now. That's what this means. We're dead now. We're not going to make it back. We have already died and we're not going to make it back.
Yeah.
No immortal for us and no life either. You fucked it up.
They start maybe blaming each other. You can make it a really big, you can even make it that it's even like they even really take it seriously almost, and now they have to, but.
And then it breaks into 3. I think the best way to break into 3 is when you have you're going into the cave to take the hero's journey. You've gone past your thing and now you're going to go for your final confrontation. And it's this shot where your heist crew is like all lined up and they're now walking back in to take it down, right? It's that cool moment, usually in slow motion. Mm-hmm. But the easiest way I think to break into 3 is by resolving the B plot, because it does that thing where it's like, because we're able to come together and get past this, now we can go into the cave and take on the big bad.
Yeah, we are now in sync. We are now together. Yeah.
And then you got the into the cave. And so in Marvel, the Marvel formula, there's often a moment where you defeat the big bad, and then the big bad comes back. Mm-hmm. In like, it's in their more realized form, or their more primal form, or their more powerful form, and so you've got to step it up to take them over again. So it's kind of like a plateau, a push, and then you topple them. Mm-hmm. And that's the cave battle, and then you have your final image, which should tie into, should tie it all up. Mm-hmm. So I think you might want to think about what is the big bad, and it might not be an actual big bad. It could be a concept.
Right. I mean, these are trials. Right. So you have to sit and think about.
And the big bad is probably immortality, and making it through.
Right. Because we talked about that the catalyst is that they have to deconstruct themselves somehow.
Right.
To start these trials. Once they learn that, or, because now I really want to write that Dionysus story, because I think that would just be funny as hell. Like, he's going through these trials and doesn't even realize it. Like, his whole thing is like a dude, what's my car? Where's my car?
Right.
Like, they're just doing all this shit and doesn't realize it. I really don't want to write that now. But anyway. And the thing that we talked about was that in order to gain immortality, you have and come through it, you have to be able to justify or have a reason for living that long. Like, you have to have enough of a purpose to go for it. And I think we talked about it not necessarily having to be a good purpose. Like, it could be spite. Like, literally, I am so spiteful that I have so much spite that I will become immortal so that I can do this, right? Or love, or, which would be like Orpheus, if he was going to go through it, right? Or hope, or whatever your purpose has to be. In order to achieve that mortality, you have to display that your characteristic, what's inside of you, whatever outstanding characteristic that it is that you have that possess you to do this, is enough to carry you through the weight of years, which can be long.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So
So
I think
whatever they face at the end is going to be where they have to prove that they have learned enough, or that they have enough cleverness and cunning, or whatever their quality. It might not exactly be that, but whatever brings that about uh, in them is enough for them to have immortality. And then of course they come back. Apollo's like, "What the shit?" He's all
yeah.
mad, and Zeus is just like, Ugh. well, that was funny. you know.
Yeah,
Well, now we
yeah.
have to do this all over. I paid all this for catering, and now it's all fricked
Right. Awesome. So yeah, you can get to work. I think the for the sake of the story, I would just get it out. We're probably going to need to meet again and go over who these people are. These people being like Zeus and Apollo and some of the tertiary characters. And because we're creating canon at this point, so we might need to do some world building around that. I have thoughts on Zeus. I want to make sure I get my thoughts out there before we go too far along this track. I don't know that we'll go with my thoughts necessarily, but I'd like to at least have them discussed in the writers' room.
Okay.
And so there's some world development that probably needs to happen in conjunction with your story. But I would suggest go ahead and just writing it with the names that we know. And then we can start working out over the next session or two what the who they are, what's canon about them. And we'll also have to deal with setting a bit. What does Adolinus look like? You're gonna be the first to be writing in it, so it's very, very exciting. We're gonna have to kind of figure out some of that stuff. Not a lot of it. I don't know that it's not a very big story,
Yeah.
But what does it look like? Wherever they're going to be.
Yeah.
So we had discussed, now that we're kind of in story building mode, we have discussed of turning this into an every other week stream that would allow time to work in between sessions.
Yeah.
Do you think that's good?
That works.
Yeah. I mean, because of content, we're supposed to have something every week, but maybe we can come up with another stream, another Lacuna stream we can do in between the story building streams. But for now, we'll just kind of change it to a every other week schedule. That'll give you a little bit of time to write. And I'm not writing yet, so it'll be easy for me.
Right.
I'm just gonna sit around. I'm gonna sit around and not do anything.
Indeed.
But then we can. But after you've gotten some way through, even if it's not very far through in writing, but conceiving the story or however it is, you can even talk to us about your process, and then we can start filling in the blanks on the setting and stuff as we get to it.
Cool. Sounds good to me.
All right, cool. So let's plan on meeting in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, we'll get active on social media. I'm going to try to do some more on Discord, and then we're going to be working on the setting reference document so that you'll have the opportunity to use the setting now if you want, and use it under Creative Commons. I think the once that's more established, we should probably on the stream talk through what it means to do Creative Commons, and it does mean that your work is going to be opened up to the Commons, and I guess that's half the point. So, but there are some nuances to consider when working with that license.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right.
Awesome.
Well, I think we did it. Anything else you want to tackle?
We did it. No, I mean, I think I have a good idea. I don't think it's too much. It gives me a good idea of where I might head, but gives me lots of things about twin personalities and what their tension might be and how they're going to try to pull off this switcheroo, and researching the journey of the dead and kind of tweaking it for my own and seeing what they might encounter and coming up with all of that. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, sounds like a good story. I can't wait. It's gonna be great. And just so the audience knows, what the idea here is that while Danny is working on her story, we'll start pitching an idea for my story, and then at some point, these are going to be released to subscribers, and then ultimately published. But we haven't quite built the channels yet, but they are going to be available. So you'll have seen the whole journey of creating the story and then the completed story. So we'll start creating a library of that for people who subscribe. And by subscribe, that's kind of a loose term. I think at this point, it's, you sign up on the website, so you get alerted to that kind of subscription.
Yeah.
We're not building a pricing model, at this point. So stay tuned, and we will have more coming around the corner.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm
I think
excited.
that's it. Yeah, me too. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hermes is up first.
Hermes is up, of course.
Nice. All right. See you all in a couple weeks. Bye.